What's that sound? It's For Amusement Only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Tonight I have a special guest, Brent Griffith from the Broken Token Podcast. For those of you who don't listen to Brent and Whitney's show, Brent is one of the co-hosts of this show, and he and his friend Whitney discuss kind of the trials and tribulations of arcade collecting, repair, and maintenance. And they delve into pinball topics. They delve into arcade topics. There's a lot of monitor talk. I find it all very fascinating. I love knowing how to work on everything. I don't get the opportunity to work on arcade stuff very much, video stuff, but I do find it very interesting. And Brent and Whitney are very passionate about their hobby, and much as you might imagine someone like myself is. So I would encourage everyone to go and give them a listen. They're at brokentoken.com, and you can find them on any of your podcast devices. Now, without further ado, here is our little interview. Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge, and with me is Brent Griffith. How are you doing, Brent?
I'm doing pretty good, Nick.
I'm doing great myself. Now, Brent, I know that I waffled back and forth on coming out here, but I'm really glad that I did. It's very nice to meet you.
I'm glad that you had the opportunity to come out. I know you made a pit stop with another local, got to spend a little time with him, and hopefully I've given you the good tour, I guess, of my game room and some of my things.
I'm suitably impressed.
Well, that's, Nick, it was great just kind of giving you an opportunity to see, the game room in person. I know we've talked about it quite a bit on my show, and maybe some of the behind the scenes things that go on here.
Yeah. And it's nice to, put a face to the show and all that good stuff, as well as to the games.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But Brent here was instrumental in the Turf King.
Oh, yes, the mighty Turf King.
That's right, which is sitting in the back of the trailer right now. So.
When Nick first pulled in, I was like, all right, you got to show me how you ended up getting the Turf King in that trailer. And when I had first laid eyes on the Turf King, for anyone that's never seen one, a picture doesn't do it justice. I mean, you have to have something to give you an idea of scale. It is a pretty good sized game.
It is indeed. It's about a wide body size too. It's rather wide,
and it's rather deep, and the head on it is somewhat large. And one of the things that kind of jump out at me about that type of a game compared to what most people deem a conventional pinball is it doesn't have like a standard leg.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of got, I don't know, how would you describe that?
Floor-length cabinet.
Oh, yeah, there you go. There you go.
They stopped using that with the bingos.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Which is interesting. And the production for the bingos, I don't know if you know this, but it began the year after Turf King was produced.
Okay.
So that was one of the last one-ball horse race games that they made.
No, see, now if you would have asked me before you mentioned that, I would have told you that it was a bingo. Right. Because it's a classic example of not necessarily knowing what you're talking about, but knowing enough to maybe apply a blanket term.
Enough to be dangerous.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the one balls were outlawed, of course, because they were gambling devices. And
now, do you remember I had two or how many one? I come across some one balls. Was it two? It was two games?
2 one balls. That's right.
And it was, gosh help me, Tropic Queen. Was it that?
But that was the reskinned Beach Queen.
Or was it the other way around?
Or the other way around.
Yeah, because
I have to look at pictures.
Yeah, when you looked at the games were identical from a playfield and a cabinet perspective, and then the difference being the back glass.
Right.
And of course, the locations for all the lights and everything were the same, just the art was different. And so whichever one came first, I'm not sure. But you had to explain that whole concept to me. I mean, it was just looking at it was interesting because it was like a 3/4 scale pinball, a classic pinball that we all kind of know and love.
Right.
Yeah. So that was your classic, I guess, early example of a gambling game?
Well, those were a later example.
Okay.
And they're real oddities because the one balls were outlawed in 1950.
Okay.
And that's, what moved them to bingo production. Those were produced in 1963 or somewhere way down the line.
Yes, I remember them being mid-ish 60s.
But the difference is that they have a much more similar playfield to a standard pinball,
Mm-hmm.
a flipper game. They don't have flippers.
Mm-hmm. No flipper.
But they have these super powerful kickers down at the bottom.
Yes.
Swings. So they're just, different, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
And you ran across these two beautiful examples.
Yes, I did.
And
that was somewhere along the line. It was kind of that classic. Well, I've got a friend that knows a guy that knows a guy that has a barber that does this. You know what I mean? Kind of that example.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody literally right around the corner from the house that I more or less grew up in, he had these games. He was storing them for someone, and that person had lost interest. And, you and I, we'd had this conversation earlier about just trying to not let things go to waste. Mm-hmm. Because the games that we work on, some of the stuff I work on, there's new production. Mm-hmm. There's reproduction. There's parts that exist.
Right.
But a lot of it, what's there is there. And that's really the case in your area. Kind of what's there is there. There's not a lot of reproduction. And the gentleman that had these was more of a car person.
Mm-hmm.
But he had that same mentality. There was some reproduction, not a lot. More or less what was there was there.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really care about the games, but he just didn't want them to go to waste.
Right.
He needed them out of his way. And so he went through all the trouble to track somebody down, which was me.
Cool.
And I ended up, there was a gentleman, I put him on, I can't remember. I think it was a Facebook group. And I'll admit, I got him for little nothing, and I made maybe the equivalent of $25 off of him, because at the end of the day, it was a little bit of effort. And I say little, that's tongue in cheek,
right?
Because we all know it's always more than you anticipate. And I thought, well, I'm at least going to kind of get fuel out of this. I'm going to just more or less I gave them away, because I lost it in terms of fuel and time and effort and all that.
Right.
But as it turned out, they went to a gentleman right around the corner from me.
Hey, that works out.
And he was glad to have them, and he had one of them up and running and just the basics of working within days. So it all worked out.
That's great. So have you been over to play it?
I have not, no. It's just...
You got to make time, bro.
I know. You keep you keep planting the seeds for me to get an EM game of some type. And, right now we're in my game room, which is where it also doubles as the studio for the podcast that Whitney Roberts and I do, the Broken Token podcast. And Nick is surrounded in solid state goodness.
Absolutely.
Solid state pen and video. So no EMs yet, but I don't know. I told you earlier, if a Nippet come by, I played one recently, and I think I'm hooked on that one. So,
well, keep my eye out. Those are pretty easy to come by.
Are they?
Yeah, they made a bunch of them.
He says as his ears perk up.
Yeah. So, next time I'm in the neighborhood, I was telling Steve earlier, I recorded an interview with him.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to bring a bingo bar.
Okay. Yeah, like you could just do that.
Set it up on the back of the truck, get you all to try it. It's an experience.
You were explaining to me earlier how to play one, and as I said, I've seen several, but I've never seen any working.
Yep.
So
makes a difference.
I didn't make it to Expo this year. I made it last year. I don't recall them having any. They had plenty of EMs. Pinball Expo in Chicago.
Yeah, I've heard that they did not have any last year or this previous year, 2015.
Okay.
So I don't think it's usual for them to have them. But I do know that many of the other shows, too. I know that Southern Fried Game Room Expo does not normally have them.
Yeah, I have made every year that they've had their show, and they haven't. Now, in everyone's defense, the shows are dependent upon what people bring.
Correct.
So now, didn't you just recently do a show where you set up?
I did. I went out to the York show, and I helped put together a row of 12 bingos each day.
Well, that's probably the most it's been together in a decade, or 2 decades. Yes.
Especially at a show, they're very unusual to see more than 2 or 3.
Well, see, now that gives you a reason to come to SFGE and bring a bingo.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I know a collector in the Atlanta area who's got a bunch of beautiful.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. That would be.
We'll have to reach out and see.
Well, yeah, you're quite a distance, so I'll let you off the hook if you.
Oh, we can coordinate.
You can coordinate, yeah. Maybe you could show up and then provide labor for the local collector.
Yeah, I'll help put it together. That's for sure. So, Brent, you say you have no EM, but have you worked on any EM arcade games?
I have not.
I can tell your heart is really with the arcade scene here.
Yeah, and if you look at the games that are here, and I have this conversation with a lot of video collectors. Well, there's several ways to relate this. Collecting generally, because you're a perfect example of being outside the box. I am older than you, but yet too young to have remembered bingos in the day. And generally, people collect what is nostalgic for them.
Right.
Generally. So, your video collection, your video arcade collection is a lot like people that collect consoles, in that some people will do the Atari 2600. Some people will do the NES. Right. Well, they're only separated from time by a very
small
number of years.
Right.
But it's when you were in that sweet spot that you played it, and it was nostalgic for you. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you look at the games that are down here, just the Ataris we're looking at, Centipede, Battlezone, Asteroids, Pole Position, those are games that were hot when I was in that, let's go to the arcade, right. Mom give me a quarter, kind of time frame.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh. And there's some other games here that are kind of on the fringe of that I've learned to appreciate, but the core of the collection, from a video perspective, is, I kind of stay true to my age range. So,
Gotcha.
And but I've looked at some EM games, and I've had the opportunity to have a couple EM arcade games, and because of where my collection, this even goes back to some of our earlier conversations tonight, and just in this little recording, I've had the opportunity to move those, or put person A with person B who is passionate about that. Mm-hmm. And it's more important to that person because it's their collection and that's what they enjoy.
Right.
So I was good with, okay, that's really cool. And I really like some of the, I've had an opportunity to get some of the, like the flying type arcade EM games. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that is so cool. Mm-hmm. But I know that this person is a huge collector of that, and he would do it justice beyond whatever I could even imagine. So it found a home, and I was happy with that.
Well, that's all. Yeah. But I'm going to keep trying to drive that EM wedge in here, Well, Brent, we talked earlier, and any time that you find yourself in the Richmond area, mm-hmm. I want you to come by.
Oh, I'd love to.
Play some bingos.
Oh, absolutely.
And a pile of working ones.
And speaking of, when you're back this way, and this is like, you'd mentioned you make time to do stuff.
Right.
There's a local collector here, and I won't throw his name out there because I do this like on our show. I've kind of got this no last name rule. Unless you've written to us, I'll say your first name. But there's a collector here. He is a huge EM guy. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he has any bingos, but he could probably be coerced. And I think you two would get along very well. You'd have to. But I need to make time. He's invited me over 1 million times, and I need to make time to go over and see his collection because I I could only imagine how much trouble I would get into and how many.
Well, nice thing is you don't have to have a big pile of boards.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've got a few pins here, and once I kind of finally crossed that line, I knew that there's always been kind of this joke that they start to take over, and they start to squeeze out, and that's kind of what's happening here to a degree. I mean, I'm only at 4, but there's one in the shop, and I don't know. I'm kind of afraid to go over
to the dark side.
Yes, I'm afraid to go play them. I might like them too much. So,
so do you have any plans to collect or do anything outside of kind of the zone that you found yourself in with kind of the early 80s video? Or where do you see yourself expanding in the future?
Well, I already mentioned the pinballs,
right.
And that's kind
Which it'll be completely full.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of cliche. Let's be honest.
Yes,
It related, but not, if that makes sense. I'm really starting to kind of put an eye toward kind of the satellite things that go with the game room, kind of like your aesthetics. Mm-hmm. The one thing I've kind of got going against me here is I've kind of got low ceilings.
Right.
And, I don't have really problems getting video games in here, pinball machines with toppers to a certain degree. I had a Big Guns down here, which has got just that real tall.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's got the real tall head on it. And so, I mean, I'm okay there, but I'm lacking in what I'm kind of jealous, and I hate being that way, of some of my fellow local collectors where they've got more headroom and then they've got an area to display kind of other items of nostalgia, whether it's game room related or just things from the back in the day when we were younger. And actually, that's where I kind of see myself expanding, is trying to take some of those things, those period pieces that kind of round the game room out from an aesthetic perspective, and figuring out where I can work them into the game room.
Right.
So that I've kind of, my eye's gone that way the past several months. Just what can I do and how can I do it? And how can I utilize some of the space that's down here? And that, from a game perspective, we talked a little earlier about some of the projects I've got in queue and how that queue kind of rearranges it. I'm sure that's not unique to me. And I'm trying not to, air quotes, want anything else.
That's good.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm really kind of looking at more aesthetics, honestly. So sounds a little corny, but that's kind of the way it is,
No, I don't know if any of your listeners, have you posted pictures of your game room?
It's been a while. On one of the early shows, and gosh, at this point it's been pushing 3 years, I did. And I keep telling myself I need to do a walkthrough. And right now I've kind of got it stable. And I need to take advantage of this wonderful technology that we all have in our hands, these cell phones.
Right.
I need to just do that and then just post it to our YouTube channel and kind of get it out there.
With all your free time.
Yeah, with all my free time. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I understand. I will say that Brent's Game Room is absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Your games, the aesthetic that you do have is amazing. I mean, he's got the black light carpet. It feels like you're walking into 1986.
Yes.
At the mall arcade, which is where I used to go play. So.
When I did the game room, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I don't even think I got. We've had the opportunity to. It's been great, Nick, having you here. We've got the opportunity to share so many stories. We've talked a lot on email and a couple phone calls and texts here and there, and it's not like actually being face to face.
Right.
And if you've heard my show, Whitney's in our show, both of us, we can just tangent, and that's what we. It's because it's a shared passion.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make it look as if a human, when I had the opportunity to remodel this house, lives upstairs. And if you have the lights off in the basement, even the carpet on the stairs as I transition to the basement is kind of this neutralish kind of a gray, and you don't really know what's down here until you flip the light on and you come down and you see the black light reactive carpet, and gosh, the walls. I got walls that transition from like purple to lime green to like a bright orange, and it's all just intermixed. So I wanted to get that kind of that crazy 80s game room vibe, and
I think you got it.
I think I got it. I think I did. Everyone tells me I did. So.
And one of the other things I wanted to talk about was this electrical panel that you showed me.
Oh, yeah.
Because I find it fascinating. It's so cool. Well, why don't you just describe what this is here?
So when I put the game room together, you always have that question: is how are you going to turn the games on? And do you go through and you turn them all on in one at a time? If you're lucky enough where you have breakers that service just that space, you flip the breakers. So a local collector who is an electrician uses contactors, is what they're called. In the DC world, I figured something had to exist in the AC world, like what I know as your standard relay in the DC world. Okay, so a typical example of a relay is like a horn relay in a car. A horn is a pretty high draw item, and you don't pull all that current through the horn button in the steering wheel.
Right.
The steering wheel energizes a coil in a little box called a relay, and then same thing. It's like a coil in a pinball machine.
Every EM.
Anybody on this podcast is like, shut up. We know what you're talking about. It's a coil, and it pulls either switches closed or open or whatever. Right. Just like in your EMs, you've got banks of them.
Yep.
So in the I got with this local collector who happens to be an electrician, and he uses a contactor, which is a relay, to turn his game room on. So he'll flip a switch, the contactor pulls closed, all the circuits activate. And I thought, man, that's the perfect way to do it. And I had the opportunity to integrate that into the system. As I was working the basement and painting the walls and was behind things and in things and all that, I said, okay, I've got an opportunity here where I could work these in. So what I have is a set of contactors that close the 5 circuits that are here in the basement that run all the games. And what I have to activate them, I could have just used a switch, just your typical boring switch. Yep. Well, I have a big, for what it is, Siemens box that you would use to turn on like a piece of an industrial equipment. Okay,
like a huge industrial something.
Yes, yeah,
something like that.
like you're going to turn on a printing press or something, or stadium lights.
Right.
And I think that box has got 2 poles. Each pole is capable of 30 amps, and I might be pulling half an amp through it, but it just looks cool. It's got a big red handle, and you got to push it up like you're okay, Dr. Frankenstein. Yeah. We're gonna do this.
Exactly.
And you flip that. And one of the poles in that box sends the signal over to the contactors. And it doesn't just send the signal over to the contactors. I've actually, because I didn't want to flip on all 5 circuits at one time, I kind of wanted to stage it.
Which is very smart.
So if you look in the box, I've got, below the contactors, I've got 2 delay on make timers. And everybody has one of these in their home. They just have never seen it. It's in your furnace. Mm-hmm. It keeps you from short cycling your furnace, meaning if I go up there and I flip it on, off, on, off, on, off, it won't go on, off, on, off. There's a timer that keeps that from occurring so that you're basically not shocking the motor or the compressor or whatever it's
doing.
Air quote, delaying. Right. Correct. So I activate one of those timers, and I get a slight delay before the first contactor comes on. So the reason there's that initial delay is we run into this in my show all the time, and I can only imagine you do. This is an audio medium that does not lend itself to visual.
Right.
So I can only imagine when we run into this all the time. I'm sure you do too. So you flip the switch, and what happens actually is I send 2 signals over to this main box. The first signal goes to a little solid-state relay that turns off the normal lighting in the room. Okay, so right now we've got our typical white lights in the room. That relay shuts those lights off. In the big switch, the big Siemens switch, the second pole actually turns on the black lights.
Okay.
So as soon as you flip the switch, the white lights go off, the black lights come on.
Mm-hmm.
That signal that went over into the panel where the relay is that turned off the white lights,
mm-hmm.
that also trips the first timer. So you initially get that instant boom, black lights on, and then about a half a second later, you hear the contactor slam, and half the game room comes on.
Uh-huh.
So you get all the pinballs coming on. You get all pole position booting. You get, the beeps out of whatever's on those circuits, which is pretty cool.
Yes, it is.
So then cascaded out of that contactor, it goes into a second timer.
Mm-hmm.
And then about a half a second later, you hear the other contactor slam shut, and then the rest of the game room comes on.
Now,
and it's the stage thing. It's really...
I will say that's incredibly clever. I was very impressed.
Thank you.
Because that's a beautiful solution. When I do, this is pretty low tech, but I have multiple remotes.
Okay, yeah.
And they trigger each circuit.
Oh, okay, I got you. Yep.
So that's much nicer.
Yeah. Well,
being able to flip the single switch.
Like I said, I had the opportunity. I was remodeling the basement, so it was I was there, and I was where I could get to the feeds for these circuits. Okay. So I was fortunate there in that. Now, if I had run with the basement as it was, where it kind of had like a boring carpet and plain walls, and I wasn't in a position to have the time and the funds, to remodel as I was able to do. I was very fortunate to be able to do that. Then I would probably, like at my old house, I did something similar, or even more low tech than what you did. I just walked around and turned everything on. I had everything plugged into an outlet, and then because I was working with what was there, I even had heavy extension cords that I ran along the baseboards and into back rooms in my basement because I knew there was another circuit back there, so that I wasn't overloading what I had out in the main basement.
I'm making a face right now.
Yeah.
So, Brent, how do you feel about the solid-state games that use these custom chips or other irreplaceable chips, and the future, what that holds for them?
I think the chances of games that are kind of in that boat hinge upon the popularity of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So a good example is like some of your Namco custom chips.
Okay.
You run into those in Galaga has them. Dig Dug has them. Well, wait a minute. That's Bally, Midway, and that's Atari. Well, Namco made the game.
Uh-huh.
So I happen to have, over time, and I know a lot of collectors do this, I have a hoard of Namco boards so that I can fix other games. Like I've got several Dig Dug boards, and I know that those might come in handy because of some of the customs that are used in other Namco games. Pole Position, Atari game. It's custom chips. Because of the popularity of those games, you've got folks that are looking to reproduce those customs.
Right.
Another good example is the Nintendo Versus. I know you and I have got to talk a little bit about the Versus chip, Versus games, and I kind of brought you up to speed. The board set. I brought you up to speed a little bit on those.
Uh-huh.
Well, the color palette chip is specific to a game or a couple games. So, like we talked a little bit about how you can take a Versus board and you just change the games on either side of the board. It's a series of ROMs.
Mm-hmm.
Along with that ROM, which is just a standard, you can program it with an EEPROM programmer. You can get the programmer off eBay for $30 and program your set. Well, there is a color palette chip that will, in some cases, works with one game, or in some cases works with 2, 3, or 4 games. people are looking at reproducing those because when they fail, they're done.
Right.
They weren't very widely used. So when they're gone, they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's folks that have looked at reproducing like your Pokey chips that are used in your Atari games.
Is one of those things.
That's
it's
one
like
of those
when
things.
they're gone, that's going to be a problem.
Exactly.
They're using computers. They're used all over the place.
Right. So the flip side of it is games that get lost to time because they're just not popular.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's where I think MAME has its place.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people enjoy MAME. I've used MAME in the past. It kind of pushed me from some console collecting into the arcade side to a certain degree. There was other forces at play.
Factors,
yeah,
right?
other factors, exactly. But I think MAME is where it's going to end up being. A lot of people, they really enjoy MAME because they have only the space for one cabinet, but they have the desire to play the games.
Sure.
And I know Whitney and I have talked about this on our show. We're fortunate that we've got some space that we could set aside for game rooms, and we can dedicate a lot of real estate to these things. A lot of people can't, and MAME is a great option, and it's kind of, in my opinion, kind of its subcharter is to keep this stuff alive.
Right.
So
now, how do you feel about pinball though? Because that's an almost different animal.
My gosh, it's killing me.
Well, meaning
space and time and money.
Yes.
That's not what you're asking.
Not how do you feel in general, but how do you feel about the specific chipsets and board sets in those? Some of them have been reproduced. Some of them have not. Many of them have succumbed to acid damage from batteries, which are on the board, and we've talked about that earlier today. So, over time, they're going to be harder and harder to find. And also, like for example, I believe Rotten Dog is no longer producing.
Oh, they're not.
As far as I know, I believe Jim has retired, and he's not going to do it.
Oh, so, wow.
Now, I don't know if he's selling his designs out or
maybe to Alltech or somebody.
I have no idea. But that's something that I've heard, and maybe that's just a rumor. So I'm happy to spread all kinds of unsubstantiated rumors.
Awesome.
But that's a concern.
So, it's interesting. Go ahead, because I've actually got this has been on my mind. Mm-hmm. This is interesting. So, did you have another thing to add to that?
So, like System 11, for example, the MPU, Ron Dog makes it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else makes a System 11 MPU replacement.
Okay.
And they made 3 different versions, A, B, and C.
Right.
And vanilla.
And what?
And vanilla, just 11.
Oh, okay.
Period. So, what do you do?
So, here's my opinion.
Okay.
And then, opinions are like noses. For the most part, everyone has one.
Absolutely.
I say for the most part, on the pinball side, you really don't have this phenomenon on the video game side.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that there's been an effort for a gentleman's been looking at reproducing pole position and then making like a pole position 1-2 combo, but you really don't have for the most part, a drop-in replacement for your popular games. You can't go out per se and get a board that plugs right into your Pac-Man and it plays Pac-Man.
And you just move the ROMs over or whatever.
With no other changes.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
There's multi-game boards and but not like the pinball world where you've got the equivalent of a drop-in replacement. Okay, for a lot of games.
Right.
And what I seem to see is a lot of people that are passionate for the hobby that are taking perfectly serviceable boards. And this goes back to what's there is there.
Right.
They're taking perfectly serviceable boards and they're replacing them for what it might cost them to have that board repaired. And it's not. And I don't want to cut down. That's not the intention. Cut down the folks that are producing these boards. Sure. There's obviously a need.
Right.
I tend to be like you, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, a little bit more on the hands-on kind of repair it technical side of the house.
Make it work.
Make it work. Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think of, I have a problem running out and doing that when I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, it's probably just a single driver, or I just need to recap the power supply, or it's a voltage regulator, or service people are hard to find though. Mm-hmm. So like you saw my Genesis out in the garage.
Yeah.
And this is what worries me about the Genesis. That Genesis, every board in it's been replaced.
Yes.
So
that should concern you.
That should concern me.
But on the flip side, what if the boards had been long missing before that?
They weren't. The gentleman was he really wanted the game to work. He was building a small little like man cave game room. Really great guy, and he was working on it to the level that he knew that he could work on it, which was basically
swapping a new board.
Yeah, it's like
which honestly is what the manual says to do.
Yeah, technically
in the troubleshooting guide,
And here's what I think we're going to run into, and I'm wondering if this is what's going to happen with the Rock Dog stuff. I got a video game out in the garage right now. There's a Tempest out in the garage. Okay, and that Tempest there's a Tempest here. And the Tempest in the garage is slated for a Major Havoc conversion. Okay. So no, I'm not destroying a Tempest. I can put it back to a Tempest at any point in time. I've got all the pieces. The board doesn't work, but I do have the board. I don't have to damage the harness. It's completely convertible back and forth. But I also happen to have the full Atari setup from Atari to convert it to a Major Havoc, including the conversion board that plugs right into the harness.
So for people who are listening who are not familiar with video at all,
which
there are some, Major Havoc was a conversion kit similar to the pinball conversion kits that they used to sell. That would take your Tempest, right?
Right.
And just completely convert it into a new game.
Yeah, and it was right from Atari.
Yep.
It was not a third-party thing.
Directly from the factory that made Tempest.
Correct. Right. So in that cabinet, it's got a color vector monitor, and it's got an aftermarket, I think it's a high voltage board in it. Company's gone.
Right.
And I know it's broken.
Yeah.
So what do I do? They kind of did their own thing. They used modern parts. And outside of best guess, or I'm fairly certain, it's been a while since I've looked at it, it's not like I'm going to look in it and see a smoldering hole and know,
oh,
that's it. Well, what was that?
Right.
Before it bled out the magic smoke.
Right.
So either I blindly guess at trying to fix it because there's no other points of reference for it, or I go back and I try to find an original part. Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to run into that with the Genesis.
Now, are there schematics for these?
Not that I'm aware of. I can't even remember who made it. I mean, I've had that game probably 6 years, and I know that the person that had it before me had it for several. And
see, that's exactly what terrifies me about solid state, because there's really not a way you can make your own schematic. I mean, well, there is, but you would have to spend the rest of your life.
Yeah, trace every gate and every yes.
What does this chip actually do? Looking up specs and hoping that they're online and all that good stuff. So that's what appeals to me about EM repair. If the pieces are there, you can make it work. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about did this battery blow up at some point in the past? Has it been replaced? Mm-hmm. Well, did they clean up the acid damage?
Yep.
Did they do it right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Did they do it right, but it's still messed up?
Yes.
I mean, there are so many factors in solid state repair.
So there's no batteries in an EM game?
Not many.
Not many. Okay.
Okay. So there is an exception, actually.
Oh, okay.
Games from the 30s, like tabletop games that they used to make, pinball machines.
Mm-hmm.
They would sell them in either floor standing models or countertop.
Okay.
They play them in a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have a mechanical timer.
Okay.
And that would run your lights off of a dry cell battery.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that.
Yes. And so, those are big, heavy things. They typically, when they go bad, don't,
they don't puke
all over
everything.
Yeah. So, that's the exception. But as far as other games, no.
Well, you and I have talked a little, about the whole battery phenomenon. And, the Addams family that's here, I've talked about it several times on our show on the Broken Token Facebook page. There's a whole photo gallery of pictures where I've done CPU repair because that had battery leak on. And that's a terrible example because you've got a lot of little hairline traces on that.
Yes.
You know, earlier we were talking about a video game, a game I'd like to put back together, Potato Kicks. And you had asked, are they hard to find, the boards? I'm like, no, they're not hard to find. They're just all eaten up from battery corrosion, you know. So, but yeah, from the pinball world, that's one thing that crosses my mind is that, you know, the knowledge for the repair is based on the OEM's boards.
Right.
And that's what would concern me with all the replacements. I'm on the fence about it. I mean, I definitely understand it, but I just don't.
In some capacities where they're using the same schematic.
A recreation,
but they're using modern components, you know, solid state relays instead of physical relays, you know, those kind of things. I support those, you know, higher voltage regulators, you know, all that.
If they provide the schematics.
Correct. That is crucial.
Absolutely.
And if the schematics survive with the game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Piece. So, you know, I'm sure you're like this too. You get a game. Of course, it doesn't have the paperwork with it.
No.
So, and what do you do with these replacement boards? You know, again, it's a guessing game.
Yes.
So, I guess my point is to make a really long-winded point short here, that once you get your first EM, you'll get the feel for it, and Brent, you won't want to go back. So
you are like the Sith Lord of electromechanical, and you know we had some conversations earlier for your listeners, and hopefully this is okay because I'm gonna mention another podcast,
sure,
Spooky,
yeah,
and James Willing, and I listen to his segments and try to pick up little bits of knowledge, and he doesn't get as deep as your show because James has that small segment within the larger show.
He's very good at compressing a lot of knowledge to a 10-minute segment.
Absolutely.
I'm not that good.
Oh, if you've heard our shows are like marathon. I mean, we just run on at the mouth. Again, trying to explain something that's visual in an audio medium. But his recent show, which I guess this would be the December Spooky, he was talking about the implementation of logic gates in the mechanical world and how it's done with relays and switches. And, you know, I look at a gate in an IC, TTL, and I'm like, okay, I'm doing an OR.
Right.
And I know this pin is this input and this pin is that output, and this pin is an input, this pin is an input, here's the output, and I know what an OR does.
Yeah.
And I never sat down to think about how to implement it mechanically, and it's not difficult.
Right. You're still working with ones and zeros.
Yes.
You've got a binary system all the way through, just like solid state. And it's beautiful when you think of it.
Well, you can see the bits.
Yes.
You can literally see the bits.
Absolutely.
And
some of them have sparks.
Yeah.
Occasionally a smell.
Great. That bit stank. Oh.
But yeah, it's a great way to look at it, and especially if you're coming from the solid state side, it's a good way to get into it. Like you say, it opens your eyes, right? So
I've definitely tried to play some EMs. When I was at Chicago last year, I've heard this talked about on other shows. The EMs just don't get love. And I look at the solid state games, and it's like, yeah, that's great. But even a rare game, at this point, I've been to enough shows. I'm like, okay, I've played it.
Right.
And I made a point to go over and start playing EMs. Yeah. And I went like, you know, I went young boy. I went like 12-year-old. I'm like, okay, what has the brightest, flashiest, shiniest lights? And let's start there. You
bingo.
Know. Yeah. Oh, bingo. Well, there's no bingos. So it's like, oh, there's a car race game. I like cars. Let's go play that. Yeah. You know and I had a ball. So.
Any standout titles? Anything that really
honestly, there it was just such an overload that it was just like game to game to game, and I didn't fall in love with any. And I'll come back to it again. A local collector, went to his house. He had a Nip It.
Yeah.
And I know that is the game that was in Happy Days.
Yeah.
Despite, I think, isn't
made in 1970.
Yeah. I was like, what's the joke there? Isn't it like
1950?
Yeah, was there like a DeLorean and a time machine and maybe a trailer that had the game that took it? But I'd never played one, and I was like, this is an awesome game. I love this. This is cool. And then when I found out what the second button for what is the shark toy thing? The gator toy. I was like, this is even better.
Yeah, it's not the love.
No, so now I'm mad because now I might have to try to find one of those.
Like I said, they made a billion of them.
So yeah,
you're in luck. That's a good title.
Yeah, I think that. So yeah, if it's not like a super rare title.
The only thing to look out for with that is the actual coil that holds the gator mouth is kind of unique-ish.
Okay.
It could be redone. You'd send it off to Stevie Young.
And have it respun or something.
But if that's missing, it's a little hard to source.
Okay.
Because it's a semi-unique part.
Well, now you got me. Who made that? Who made that game?
Bally.
So now you've got me thinking because I've just come across kind of a horde of pinball parts. Let's just kind of this. Did you all do this in the EM world? Whitney and I have talked about this phenomenon where and it's bad for us as a podcaster because we want to talk about what we've got going on, but you don't want too much information out until you've until you've circled the proverbial wagons and it's in your hands. Do you all do that? Does that exist in the EM world too?
A little bit, but I mean, I run in such a different, weird little circle that it's not quite the same.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, certainly any collector is going to be
a little
protected.
Yes.
Of their find.
So I need to. Now you've made me think. I've come across this horde of pinball parts, and it's not just like later like D&D era parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's early solid state and even reaching into some later EMs. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that era. And now I know there was some really oddball looking bits and pieces and coils, and now I'm going to have to go look and see if I happen to have one or two of those kicking around because, then, it's kind of like building a classic muscle car based on the horn button. I've got this coil.
What is it?
I'm going to have the rest of the game now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it'll happen.
Yeah.
Like I said, next time I come, it'll be all EMs.
It'll be all.
I know it.
It'll be all chimes and bells down here.
Oh, it'll be beautiful. And well, Brent, I want to thank you very much for having me over.
Well, I'm glad you can make it.
Let me take up your whole day.
Oh, it's no problem at all. I'm appreciative that you can make it. I know that you're in transit and you've got some family waiting on you. I'm just delighted that it has worked out where you can come by. It's for all your listeners out there. Here's a little behind the scenes. If you think what you do as a hobby is niche, my side of it is bigger because I've got videos and later pins. Your side of it is smaller because you're EM, and it's even smaller because you really like bingos. There's even less people that do podcasts.
Right.
So it's really awesome, and I'm sure it is for you, Nick, when you get to meet your listeners.
Yeah.
It's great for us when we get to meet ours. Man, it's really awesome when we get to meet fellow podcasters. So no, I feel like I'm holding you up.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciative. Thank you so very much.
Well, had a great time, and hopefully I can play a round or two and then hit the road.
Okay, we can do that.
All right, Brent.
I want to thank my guest again, Brent Griffith, for joining me. He is one half of the duo that makes up the Broken Token Arcade and Pinball podcast. I got to try out some games that I had never played before there, and that's always a treat. Now, I also wanted to let you all know that we are still running our t-shirt pre-order, and if we have 12 people who are interested in buying shirts, we'll go ahead and send that to the printer and get those made up. So if you'd like to get in an order, now's a chance. You'll find the instructions in the show notes, and you'll also find them on the website. And that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.